Welcome to another weekly edition of Account-Based Friday. We've got a special guest joining us from the Bay Area today, CEO and co-founder of LeanData, Evan Liang, who's had a great run there, 12 years of talking and bringing LeanData through a scalable solution. We're going to talk all about buyers groups today. First, let me orient you around. My co-host, Meg Heuer, and I have been doing over 200 videos of these over the last 2 or 3 years. We give you the ability to ask questions, so pop them below on LinkedIn, and we have the ability to promote those questions up. So as you have questions, we can address those questions even to Evan or to Meg or myself. And in the upper corner, you'll notice that there is a QR code on the screen. The QR code brings you to the 200 plus videos that we've done. You can, if you get any value out of today, we would encourage you to like and subscribe or pass along to a friend that this has been a very valuable session for you. It's valuable because of my co-host, Meg Heuer, who's a former head of research at Serious Decisions and also former CMO. I, too, have been a practicing CMO, and now I own my own agency. And each week we bring on a special guest, and this week, no different, Evan Liang, as I mentioned earlier. The format of this is we typically start off with a poll each week, and this week's poll was around opportunities and stage reporting. And the motivation behind me asking this question, because LinkedIn polls are so simplistic, you're limited to the number of characters. I was really trying to understand, are people using the leads object in Salesforce? Are they using stage 0 as kind of a holding ground for opportunities or not? And so when I asked this question, and it was just this morning, so it's just now populating, it looks like there's a pretty consistent break here, though. About 80% of the users so far are saying that they report at certain stages. And what that tells me, and probably what you see, I checked that as the solution too, for certain companies, it probably makes a lot of sense to have a non-reportable stage like a stage 0, such that sales and marketing can have a handoff. But I'm curious, Meg, what was your reaction to today's poll?
Yep, I picked reportable at a certain stage too. It's been my experience in every company. They've got a point at which they want you to enter things, but it is starting to change because, to your point, John, and Evan, why we're so excited to have you here today, when you think about an account-based environment, if you have defined companies who are the ones you would like to be buying from you or who are already buying from you, they're not really a lead, but they're qualified. So where do you put them? And how do you keep track of who it is you ought to be engaging and whether or not you're doing a good job of leveraging marketing and sales and anyone else who can help to get to those accounts? So, Evan, that's why we're very happy to have you joining us today to help us make some sense of the things that are changing.
Excited to be here. And yeah, I love this poll. And we had done something similar, specifically calling out 0-stage opportunities and how many people thought that they could do it. And the results there on a separate poll was around 70% thought they would do $0 opportunities, with 30% saying that they probably could not due to issues around like sales owning opportunities, marketing not being able to create it. So similar data to what you're showing here on your small data set already.
Gotcha. And just thinking about maybe taking a step back here and thinking about definitions. I know we wanted to talk about buyers groups today. How would you even define a buyers group from LeanData's perspective, or what have you seen there with buyers groups recently?
Yeah, no. So I think the thing about buyers groups is the interesting thing is from the sales perspective, they've always been doing this. This is just how sales thinks about things. A buyers group is just a collection of individuals at a prospect that's trying to make a purchase decision. So it's very, very simple in some respects. Like I said, sales always thinks that way. I think the big change now is the maturation of folks moving from leads to accounts, and still being account centric, to buying groups. It's how you align your sales and go-to-market motion and your systems and processes in order to make that happen. That's the big change.
Why do you think people are open to this change now? What's there's a lot of discussion right now about the shift from leads to buying groups and the role of accounts in there. What do you think has brought people to the table to sort of think differently about all of the above?
Yes, I think two big things. So on a long-term historical trend, it's just that people have gone. You need to go through those various steps. Leads are the most easy to start with, right? It's easy to measure. To do like that. That's why that MQL concept really resonates. But people saw that it didn't complete the picture, right? There's a lot of issues with MQLs. Your classic sales and marketing argument about like, hey, I generated so many MQLs, and the sales team is like, those are crap, right? So I think that's where people went from there to more account based, and people will stay account based, and within account based, some portion of it makes sense to be more buying groups. So I think it's just a natural maturation as people move and become more sophisticated. The second thing I would say is in today's environment, especially more tech oriented companies, the idea of a lot of what we've been doing in the past hasn't been working that well, and money is tight, and people need to be a lot more precise around how they're doing their targeting. And so that's why people are looking at these systems, realizing that just generating a whole bunch of MQLs and calling that a win is not going to work anymore. And so people are hungry to try to improve those systems. And like I said, I think buying groups isn't radical from the sense that it's this concept that doesn't make sense to people. It's the fact that, hey, that next level of alignment with sales and marketing really around revenue and opportunities. And that's where opportunity sits. And that's where there's this hunger to be like, we need to be able to show and prove that we're generating pipeline and ultimately revenue, and can't just stop at the MQL. So I think this macro environment is driving even extra fuel to the fire.
It's a crazy macro environment indeed. And, just reflecting on kind of recent experiences with private equity firms, we've kind of created our own beast here in a way. I don't want to point any fingers at old companies, Meg, but we kind of built this beast of having the private equity and the venture firms knowing the old Sirius model, right? The Sirius 2.0 or 1.0 model. What advice would you give to a company that is maybe seeing some of that headwind and can't necessarily, make that change immediately? How do you convince the board, the CEO, the C-suite of making that change from a MQL measurement to an opportunity-based approach?
It's a great question, and actually, I'm dealing with. We're talking to. We've held some executive cabs with some of our customers and prospects, and that comes up all the time because you're right. The PE firms are very regimented exactly around what the metrics they have. So I would suggest not a hard cutover. I would suggest being able to report in both. So, and there are definitely ways that we as an industry need to make it easier to make this reporting happen, so that you don't just switch over and change the metrics on folks right away, but instead you look at it both ways and then make that switch over a little bit more slowly. But you do need to answer their direct questions. I'm actually, long time ago, I am from the venture industry, and the worst thing you can do to a venture guy is not answer his direct question and try to dance around it. The best way is to answer it precisely, but then maybe be casual around, well, let me tell you how else we can do this a little bit better. And that's the best way to actually to kind of jujitsu some of those questions.
Yeah, and you're not alone in trying to help people make that shift over. You got all the folks who were responsible for the first go around of the waterfall metrics that included the MQL from Sirius, now 4-star, and a variety of other places, all out there encouraging people to think differently and more in line with the reality of buying. Yep. Which I think that's the silly part of all of this, is all we're doing is reflecting reality. Unfortunately, sometimes common sense isn't that common, and it gets tricky to get people away from what they're used to and what we've trained to be expected. But with that in mind, Evan, how, if you were giving someone advice on getting started, what kinds of tools would you need, and what kinds of processes would you need, and then who should be involved within an organization to help bring all of this together?
Yeah, so I'll answer that last one last. Generally speaking, we are seeing that the primary champions today are coming from the marketing organization, right? And usually a key part of it is markups, right? Because to your point, it is a combination of both change management, as well as technology. Now, fortunately, on the technology side of things, I think there's been a lot of maturation that allows this to happen and make it possible. The first technology you obviously need is your CRM. What's interesting, if you look at the history of CRM, is they actually had the concept of buying groups all the way from the beginning. Opportunity contact with role was always there. It was something that was designed in the beginning by Salesforce. They had the forethought to do it. Now, the flip side is this: no one uses it. Right? I know no companies that actually use opportunity contact roles correctly. Part of the reason for that is the way it was designed was that the sales rep had to do everything. The sales rep had to find leads, convert them into contacts, and add them as opportunity contact with roles. As much as we know about sales, what is the likelihood any sales rep was going to do that? It's close to zero, right? So the system and the structure, architecture was always in place. The question is, how do we actually do it in a way that takes that load off the salesperson? And fortunately, over the past 10 years, those automations and technology automations and business processes have come along, so that there are people who are able to do that. And so I would say, hey, you have to have your CRM, and on top of that, you do need automation technology that allows you to automate, whether it be there's technology out there to bring in contacts automatically from people's calendars or from their emails, right? So automating the content ingestion and community. Obviously, you need the enrichment to make sure that you have the right names and those type of things. And then on top of that, on your CRM, and this is why LeanData has been passionate about this, is we've had clients using our technology to automate the stuff that automatic converting leads into contacts and automating adding contacts with contact roles. So automating the stuff that the salesperson needs to do on their behalf allows you to form these buying groups. And then once you form those buying groups, designing the right rules in order to make sure that they get to the right people at the company. So it's not, so for example, we started a long time ago doing lead routing, and for buying groups, it's about opportunity routing. How do you form a buying groups and route them? And there's a lot of complexity in rules. Meg, you and I were talking before this a little bit about the fact that it depends on your buying groups by your segment, right? Commercial versus enterprise, GEO, product line, and then also the complexity of who's buying and what they're interested in and what are you selling and what you do. And so all that mashing together into a more complex workflow to define and actually deliver the buying group. And that's why it's so much harder than leads. So that's kind of on the technology, but on the go-to-market alignment side, it does require a lot of changes in how you think about your go-to-market, where you're aligning. The most important one is, what does the SDR BDR do? Per your poll question, John, around the $0 up, when does the handoff happen? What is involved in that handoff? And also that's now no longer a simple question of like, hey, I generated a lead, throw it over the wall. There's much more discussions around, hey, is a qualified opportunity 3 people? Maybe, depends on what kind of product you're selling. If it's an SMB, one call closed, no, it's not 3 people. 1 may be enough, right? And some companies have both. So I think these are bigger projects. They're often part of digital transformation. But I think the companies that are making their way up there, it is now possible where I don't think it was possible 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the contact role or opportunity contact role as marketers, which is a large percentage of our audience. That's the connective tissue between campaigns and the opportunity. So the reportability of what's happening to your campaigns with those contact roles and a primary contact role really makes that connection. So, I think the discipline around that and getting that information populated either through technology or through brute force and process is super important. Plus, you could probably trigger other workflows around that to customize the data in a way that you might have personas that trigger different thought processes of, hey, I want to communicate to a C-suite differently from a non-C-suite. So those contact roles, I agree with you, they are absolutely critical in the overall process. But I guess that brings me to a long-winded way of asking a question around, in terms of company sizes or database sizes, at what stage do you feel like, okay, this is when somebody should really be looking at buyers groups? Is it, a database size? Is it your buying committee size? Is it a company size? Like at what point do you're like, yeah, you should be all in on buyers group? Or what's that maturity curve? I think we were even talking about kind of that maturity curve. What does that look like from your point of view?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's about database size. The way I would think about it is a little bit about go-to-market complexity. So for sure, if you're a multi-product company, you should be thinking buying groups, because you're going to be starting one account and you have multiple products, right? So that's one easy trigger point. I do think folks who have longer buying cycles, so it's also a little bit ASP. So if you're selling larger ASP products to folks that's like your sales cycles are 6 to 9 months or longer, then you're probably buying groups. Versus if you're like we said, you're selling a you have one product transactional that you do in one quick close, yeah, you don't need buying groups. But the flip side is this: the nice thing about the buying groups model is I kind of do think of if you think of a buying group of one, that's an MQL. So the model does allow you to fit into the transactional model as well. But yeah, you don't need that extra layer of complexity. But once you start higher product ASP, more products, more regions, then I think you'd be primed for buying groups. And that changes depending on company in terms of how they think about structuring their go-to-market. I do think what's interesting about buying groups that's a little bit different from account-based marketing, which works really alongside both of it, is ABM actually came from the early stage faster-growing tech companies. They were the first to adopt it, and I would say like the enterprise companies were later. In buying groups, but we're kind of seeing the opposite because of go-to-market complexity. I think it's the enterprise companies that are going to buying groups first, and I think over time it will trickle back down into the broader the more fast-growing early stage venture-backed companies. But then again, it could be because the venture-backed companies have no money these days. So no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons why people do or don't adopt buying groups, but for sure we're seeing more of it. And we actually had a guest last week who I would encourage people to give that one a listen. He talks a lot about multi-threading within organizations. So if the person that you've been selling to moves on or has a different role, or you need to be paying attention to more than one person to get to the win, you've got an opportunity to make sure use those opportunity contact roles to keep track of all the people you need to know. And I've also seen some interesting research on knowing if you have, who should be in an opportunity at what stage to decide if it's really qualified. So if you're not talking to the CFO, but you're claiming that you're going to close that deal in a week, probably you're not, if you're not talking to the CFO, for example. But Evan, I'm curious, you've got a front row seat to companies who are doing this adoption. Yeah. What are some things that set apart companies who are more successful versus those who have some false starts?
Yeah, so I think a couple things there. One, obviously, you need buy-in from the executive level. So the higher level, you have more executive level buy-in. That's certainly helpful. And in those companies that do have strong, second thing would probably alignment between sales and marketing. This is not just an initiative that one department can do without really aligning with the other. So I'd say that's the second. And then the third thing, more tactically, is people are generally starting off with smaller pilots. You don't try to bite off the whole thing, try to boil the ocean. Folks that are able to say, hey, let's do it in one specific region, one specific product area. Let us show the metrics around how we're showing that successfully, and then using that data to justify the buy-in to continue rolling it out. And the initial folks that we've been talking to, the initial pilots are showing tremendous success rates, huge increases in conversion rates and close rates, and and when you apply that's real money. Again, they're showing the executives where the money is, showing where the revenue is, and that really helps get it going. But it also allows you to work out the kinks a little bit, because as you make these process changes and technologies, you're going to run into a little bit of some gotchas, and you want to figure that out before you do a huge rollout to everyone across your company. And so that's what I see kind of differentiating, is folks that do have executive live bios can do some small pilots, prove it out there, and then they have the wherewithal and momentum to continue rolling it out across the company. But it is still fairly new. I want to say there is no one who is at the end of the rainbow. I can't say like someone's completely done it. It's a journey. Everyone's on the journey. They're all in different stages of that journey. The most important thing to do is take a step forward. Take one small step, and that leads to another.
Yeah, and I might be misunderstood on this, but my impression with your product, because we've got on a few of our clients and we've had hands-on dials, is it's almost like a Swiss Army knife. And not that I want to spend a lot of time thinking about it or talking about it, but being able to do that pilot, I would imagine what I've seen as a benefit of LeanData is instead of monkeying around with Salesforce, which for some companies you have to ask permission from God to make changes, you can make them more easily and test more easily in LeanData without having to move anybody's cheese in Salesforce. So I know one of the things that our clients have really benefited from is that flexibility that I think you guys really are second to none in. I don't know anybody else that's got that capability in terms of configuration. So that's super, super helpful. I guess, just building on that, and you kind of answered the question of it, maybe start small. Do you see any other pitfalls of people that have tried to do it and haven't been successful, or things to avoid as you're trying to make that situation, trying to go from leads to an all opportunity, all contact, all account type approach? Have you seen any other mistakes to avoid as part of that process?
Yeah, so I think the other one I've seen is people trying to wait for their data to be perfect. So I think some folks are just like, well, if I had all my data was perfectly aligned, I had the best enrichment sources, I had the cleanest data, I need to do all that stuff first before I can take that first step. I see those guys as it's just, you're going to be waiting too long. Does that make sense? You don't have to wait until the situation is perfect or your data is perfect, because as many of us knows, and John, you and Meg have seen people's databases. That state is nirvana. It actually won't ever happen. You'll never do it. So I think it's more important is that mentality to be like, I'm okay that I don't know everything, but yet I'm willing to, I'm willing to go and build around it, and we'll figure it out a little bit. So that's the other gotcha, is if folks are paralyzed by the need for having a perfect plan to everything, and there is no perfect data source, and your database will never be perfectly clean, but you can, doesn't mean you can't act and start doing things.
Yeah, that's great advice. I saw that hang up a lot of people in deploying account-based anything. Was thinking, oh, well, if I don't have perfect data, or I don't have perfect systems, or I don't have this or that, we can't get started. Nope, just start. So very good advice. And thinking about the data and kind of flipping that around to what should companies who are moving in the direction of buying groups report on? If we're saying, hey, MQLs aren't the end all, what is? What would you recommend as 2 or 3 metrics that could really help you know whether or not what you're shifting to is working for you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of folks that we've been talking to in our client base, what we've typically seen is they are measuring, kind of looking at the close won versus close lost, and trying to look at the differences between the buying groups in those stages, right? How many people are engaged in close won opportunities? What were the type of people that were engaged by titles versus close lost? Looking at those delta differences is very telling, right? Around, hey, if we were to shift to more opportunities looking like our close won, what would that help in terms of increasing the close rates? So those type of metrics around looking at your existing buying groups, doing some data analysis, and there are ways to do that, and trying to compare between certain segments. Now you have to segment and analyze that data, but the clients are seeing differences in there, and then their goal is, okay, if this is what it looks like, what happens when I add one new member to my buying group, right? What's the close rate by, if I have 3 members versus 4 members versus 5 members, does that increase the close rate? And if so, how do I, from a marketing and sales perspective, do a better job of that? And I think there's the classic one is, sometimes, Meg, you just mentioned it. It's just like, hey, well, I don't want to involve another person. It'll slow down my deal, but they're not involving the executive champion or the CFO. And guess what? Yeah, you go faster, but then your deal gets killed at the last moment, right? And so getting folks to understand that you have to multi-thread, involve more folks, and actually it doesn't necessarily slow your deal down. It increases your chances of closing. That's really important. The earlier you can identify that and map those stages, the more successful you're going to be. So I think the analysis really is around, again, looking at opportunities, looking at success history, and mapping out what is the ideal thing. And the interesting thing is the best reps do this intuitively. So, and actually that's another way. We're riffing. Maybe look at your best reps, how they think from their buying groups, and capture the data versus the reps who aren't performing as well. But now, then you also have to map by human behavior because your best reps may not put it all in. So how do you get all the data? So I think through data analysis, I think you can make a pretty compelling case because it's how people buy. It's how people think. So it's intuitive.
Yeah, it's a great point about the close won and close lost and comparing and contrasting the buyers groups. That's a fantastic rubric to look at. I hadn't really thought about this as you were talking about it. It kind of spurred a thought of the two sides of the funnel. You've got the acquisition side and kind of the upsell, cross-sell, retention side. How are you seeing, if you're seeing, any differences of buyers groups on either side of the funnel from your client's perspective? Are you seeing any differences there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think most folks are starting on the new side. It's a little bit easier to measure. Even like trying to measure pipeline for your upsells and retentions is not an easy exercise. We're doing that internally, being like, hey, how do you count like growth and stuff? But I do think over time, this idea of buying groups is actually will be as powerful, if not more, for the retention side of the business, right? I actually think that is part of it because a lot of more of that data is known, right? And you think about the CSM motion, how do you make sure you're multi-threaded champion? One of the things we always talk about or look at our clients is, what if your champion leaves, right? How do you make sure you're multi-threaded and working across multiple folks? And so, I think it's even more important on the customer side, but we're seeing it more start on the new business side, which is pretty normal for a lot of businesses. But I anticipate this will migrate over and become kind of part of your overall. I think you mentioned two parts of the funnel. It's part of the overall customer lifecycle, right? And so I think which is another concept we've been talking about for years, and it's so important, and it's exciting that we're going to finally get there in this next phase.
Yeah, totally agree, Evan. I think that's something that as companies are looking at efficient sources of revenue, the application of buying groups to post-sale expansion and retention just makes so much sense. So yeah, I'm glad that we were able to bring that in because I think that companies that do that sooner are going to find their acquisition costs go down sooner because they're able to get into the right accounts at the right time. Anyhow, I know we're coming up on time. John, any last questions or thoughts for Evan?
I'm out of questions. This has been a great conversation. I guess I'd flip it back to Evan. Any closing words from your perspective on anything that maybe you saw in Forrester? Because I know you just came out of Forrester or your customer advisory board, which, by the way, that spurred this connection. Was Terry from Forrester who was at your customer advisory board. He's like, yeah, I just came out of this great advisory board out of Monterey. Which is near and dear to my heart anyway. And then he had mentioned, he's like, there was some great content that came out of it, but I don't know, any closing thoughts data points or points of view that came out of that would be worth sharing?
It's just amazing to see how much momentum it's built. So I've been to Forrester conferences. I think I've been to like 10 Forrester conferences or serious decisions conferences beforehand. And it was just amazing to see the changeover. So I think last year buying groups was kind of like this concept that people were sort of intrigued at. This year they had birds of a feather at the Forrester conference, and they had a table of 10 and there was 150 people crowded around that. It was just absolutely astounding to kind of see that level of interest in it. What I would say for the audience is there's a lot of interest here. We're all on this journey together. So the best thing to do is I love these forums. We're all learning together. And so reach out to various folks. Let's share best practices because this is one of those things where I think everyone can benefit from being together in these communities and these forums. So that's kind of what I'm passionate about, is bring people together to talk about this and make our go-to-markets more efficient and ultimately drive more revenue for all of us, because it's really hard in today's environment.
Thank you, Evan. We really appreciate your insights and your your knowledge of how to help people get on this road, stay on this road, and succeed. So thank you very, very much for joining us today. And I just put your LinkedIn in the comments. If folks want to stay in touch, there's tons of great content from Evan and company. So for sure, check that out.
Thank you so much for having me, John and Meg. This was fun.
Absolutely. And Evan, one other quick thing. You have a special buyers group on LinkedIn, I think, right? Because I know I'm a member of it. If somebody wants to join that, do they just search on buyers group LeanData, or just reach out to anybody in LeanData?
No, it's not a LeanData specific. So it's called buying group leaders. Maybe buyers group leaders. So just searched on that. It's an open community, and we're trying to continue things like the poll that we did, that you've done. We just want to encourage people to ask questions and share with each other. So it is not a vendor specific group, and we're just trying to moderate and again share the knowledge.
I know you guys are behind the scenes, but we love your product just because of the flexibility and the custom object routing, which again, nobody in planet Earth does. So, hats off to everything that you've done over the last decade. I know we're tight on time here. Next week, Meg, we've got Lanice, I think.
Yes, very excited to have Lanice. She is a really smart marketing leader and practitioner of all things account-based. And we're really excited to get her, just insights and understanding of, how to make an account-based program work in different kinds of companies. So yeah, very excited that Lanice is joining us.
Awesome. Well, again, we'll see you at the same time next week. If you got any value from this, we'd encourage you to like, subscribe, or pass on to a colleague how valuable these weekly sessions are. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.